I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have RDV from the Great Midwest as usual. There's a lot of nice people there. It's something that may be important to tonight's movie, Brainstorm, starring Natalie Wood, the late, great Natalie Wood. And of course, Christopher Walken and other things we'll talk about. And of course, the young 20 something from Central Florida himself, Professor Pixel here, who almost has a passable Walken impersonation. And I don't know if that's good or that's bad, but guys, let me tell you something. I don't want to fill the whole chat with more cowbell, as Pixel was saying backstage, but I do want to say that I remember this movie once I started watching it, going, "Holy crap! This is a legitimate science fiction film. It's decent. Natalie Wood's incredible in it. I forget the name of the actress, but we'll be discussing her too. And she's phenomenal. Walken's the third or fourth best in this film, and that's not a bad thing. But this show had so many interesting things going on for it, and it could have even been better if you wanted to go really hardcore in it. It's a legitimate science fiction films that in my eyes deals with certain themes of the human condition and what you would do with a certain piece of technology, and it shows what would happen, and it's got a great 80s aesthetic to it. And overall, I think it's a very good film. Now, it's very deliberate and slow, but it does focus on the characters with an idea about it, and I liked it. And I'd forgotten a lot about it until I rewatched it and went, oh yeah, it's coming back to me, because this was the movie that as a child opened my eyes to Natalie Wood. RDV, let's start with you here from the Great Midwest. We do a lot of 80s action stuff here on the Xtreme Movie Show and other things as well. Science fiction, we kind of argue about what really is or isn't. What did you think of this film initially?
When I was getting to it, I was like, is this going to be like a thriller / like horror movie? And because I had read the synopsis, before I even suggested to you guys. So I was like, he experiences somebody else like dies and experiences thing. I was like, oh man, how trippy is this gonna be? Is this gonna be like just like a thriller, with a little bit of like a horror in it? Turned out to be a little tame, but you know what though, it fit the role, it fit the movie. Seeing young Christopher Walken, seeing him in the movie like this. Because another movie I've seen him after this was the James Bond movie, which is right around this time with Roger Moore.
Yes.
I think it was a View to a Kill, I think.
Yes. Or as Christopher Walken would say, a view to a kill. Yeah.
So it was seeing him before he got big. Is like, it's Christopher Walken, hey, it's like he was just a normal guy, but still you still get that full Walken effect. But at this time, I don't think everybody understood how powerful the Walken is. And
he's not that powerful. Stop it. He's a shell of his former self, which, as upon further review, hasn't been much. It's been the same thing for quite some time. But that's necessarily a bad thing.
But seeing him with actual normal hair and not having gray hair, because I've only seen him like in the movies where he has either silver hair or he has like he's wearing a wig,
Right.
So it's cool. Like I said, it's a slow paced movie, and I thought it actually turned out and it pretty good at the end.
Yeah, I thought it's hard to do that sometimes. We always talk about movies crapping out or getting tame or safe in the third act, but this one definitely goes for it.
You know what it reminds me of? The other movie we watched with the models. And
Looker with Albert Finney around the same time. Yes.
Yes. Same pace, same familiar kind of feeling, and just, wrapped up nicely.
A focus on characters and situation that draws us in, unlike some current stuff that who shall remain nameless for the time being. But for Professor Pixley, the young 20-something guy here in chat here, you see things a generation different than I do. You've never even seen this movie or heard of it, I imagine, and I want to ask what your initial impressions are, but I also would like you to include your impression of Natalie Wood, who I'm going to gush over here when we get going.
I would just like to say that I am as big as I have ever been, Mr. Bankman. No, but
no, hold on. He said your impression of Natalie Wood, not Walken.
I can't do that. This film, I wasn't sure what to expect other than young Christopher Walken, which is always promising. If you don't love Christopher Walken, I don't know what's wrong with you. Well, I know what's wrong with you, and that's not true. You don't love Christopher Walken. But no, this movie does have some interesting elements going for it. And as for Natalie Wood, I mean, she was great in this film. she had a strong role opposite of Mr. Walken, as it were.
So, Mr. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I was just going to finish off and go ahead and say that I feel that they worked well together, like really well together. And well, with what you said before, it makes sense as to why.
Well, let's get the Natalie Wood stuff out of the way because it's really pertinent to the film. This film was shot a year or two earlier, like in 81, maybe 82, and got put on hold, almost didn't get put out, simply because at the time, and again, I was a child, and some of our older listeners here on the Xtreme Movie Show, especially when we cover extreme classics, like to tell stories about some of the actors and actresses that and their experiences, which is always neat. But for Natalie Wood, for me, I remember when it came on the news about her drowning, and there was there was, of course, tasteless jokes about it and everything too, but apparently she was always afraid of water and was on a boat with Christopher Walken and her then husband, I think for the second time, Robert Wagner, who many people would know here from being number, was it 2 on the those goofy comedy spy films with Mike Myers in it, the Gold Members and all that too. That's him, but he played in Heart to Heart as a detective with Stephanie Powers and other things too. Apparently they had a very up and down relationship. She's a firebrand herself, but she just sort of managed to end up drowned, and of course nobody really looked into it too hard, being one of those Hollywood murders, and there's a lot of those kinds of things going on near Catalina Island. And I remember it's tragic because I really didn't know anything about her, but to me, watching this as a kid, looking at it from that perspective, what initially draws you into this movie is they start with characters and they start with the setup. They don't try to world build. They don't try to do any of this other nonsense and get too big. You immediately, if you're an adult, can tell that there's something going on between the 3 main players here, and that's Natalie Wood, that's Christopher Walken, and I hate to say this, but I forget her character's name. The other actress who really was the brains behind the operation, one that was chain smoking and has a heart attack later on, which we'll talk about. You can tell that Walken and her are an item, and he's getting divorced from Natalie Wood. We don't know why or what's going on, but somehow Natalie's handling it in a very mature manner. And Natalie Wood has always had this presence about her in addition to her just natural beauty. There's an allure to her. So if anybody that knows her from Splendor in the Grass or a bunch of other things knows exactly what I'm talking about. She looks smart. She looks intelligent. And even though we like to joke about Christopher Walken and the Walken effect that we'd come to know later on, I really think Natalie Wood sitting there and putting him over by the way she's able to handle it not only makes her a strong woman, but it means a lot to the film because we find out that this whole brainstorm activity is nothing more than a group of people that figure out a way to kind of almost capture a little bit of what some people are thinking for a few seconds at a time, and they're just working on that. But then what happens is, as they're doing it, it turns out that not only does it capture a little bit about what they're thinking by seeing what brain areas are being affected, it also captures their emotional response at the time. In other words, what they're feeling. So it's pretty interesting. Of course, there's a big government angle to it, but this movie starts from there. It's got a fantastic building that's been since torn down. That's over in the Research Triangle Park area in Carolina. And it looks futuristic, even though it's not. But it just deals with the characters and what would you do in a situation like it. And that's why this movie works, because that's what science fiction should be. Not fantasy, not space opera like Star Wars or anything else there all too. And yes, it is deliberate and slow, but RDV, I think Looker was a really apt comparison there. It's really a detective movie about why models are being killed, and we have this ray gun in there that some goofball guy driving around with the porn mustache takes out. But this was surprisingly good, like I say, with the characters. So what stood out for you that was pretty good in the film?
As far as the devices they're using too, it just seemed like a very wholesome movie, for the most part, until his lab partner, she dies. So I mean, so I was like, oh, Craig, that's where I started really piquing my interest, because so now he's like going to experience her because it's recording her brain, whatever to call it, or brain scans, whatever.
Death experience.
Yeah. So he wanted. I'm thinking, is he gonna snap and start killing people? I was like, this could go any other numbers of ways, after this. But he nearly dies because apparently she suffered a heart attack. That's how she died. And so he was gonna do it, but he almost dies himself. But then he creates something, because he's smart as he is, So basically the system compensates for that. But then it's like you also with these movies too. Whenever there's like a government project like this, the military always wants to corrupt it, and this was what happens in this movie too. So it's like this movie it was going like all over the place towards the end, but it was like it all started tying together. This is how Christopher Walken became Christopher Walken, and
I was always the Walken that you knew.
So Pixel, there really isn't a lot of good science fiction films or science fiction films in general over the past 20 years, basically in the time that you've been alive. So how did this feel different than some of the films that claim to be sci-fi recently to you?
Well, it's actually quite funny because Christopher Walken is actually going to be in Dune 2. So he's going for more sci-fi. So other than that, no, I think that it hits the right notes for science fiction. It takes place in our world, but it has this slight advantage, I suppose you could say. It depends on how you look at the technology, and the technology itself, it's not good or evil, which is appreciated, but it's how humans are going to use it. Obviously the military wants to use it to train the ultimate soldier, but it's not that's not what it was designed for. It was truly designed to go ahead and capture moments and share that amongst other people. And they can play with that and all that stuff like they do at the beginning of this film, but they aren't trying to do this just out of any kind of malice or anything. And the technology itself is interesting. Obviously, you have that well, not early 2000, but you know what I mean? Whenever they're going through the life experience and they're going through bubbles and stuff, and you can clearly tell the test of time.
Like Space Odyssey,
Yeah. So that's applied there, but it's definitely an interesting concept. I feel like the acting overall, it's strong. I can't really say that I dislike anything about this film, and I think that as a sci-fi movie, it's playing into the strong suits of it.
So Dune to me was always a political movie. If you think of the books, and one of the issues that people had even with Lynch's version or whatever is that how do you translate all that onto the big screen, and that's always a challenge. And we see that with big budget shows on some of the streaming channels now and services. But for me, Dune doesn't have. There's technology in Dune, but the technology itself and how it applies to the different races isn't necessarily what's explored. You could argue about the spice being that way with one group, but here, what would you do if you'd have this ability to do it? So one of the guys that's like he's not a main character in here, but he works with one of them. He's a young dude. So what do young guys do when they're young and they're single? They go out and they party, they drink, they have sex, they eat. Everybody does it. So what the one guy does is he takes the device and he convinces his girlfriend to mount him and ride him, while they have sex. And it's done in what I would call a tasteful way, because you actually don't really see a lot of stuff in there, and it's not a graphic sex scene or anything. It's really more hinted at than anything. So you can use sex and real life things like that would come up in a way that furthers the story along, rather than just being gratuitous about showing boobs themselves, which there's nothing wrong with that either, as the 80s movies would show. But what happens that I think is pretty interesting, and instead of just doing it for like giggles or for yucks, it's integral because it's one of the first applications we see of something that would become apparent later on and how they end the film, because there's a project manager who is actually very good at his job, dealing with people and their personalities and how they all work together on a project rather than being a dick. His boss himself, who's got a hard on for the technology too, gets it. And the guy's like, hey man, check this out. You're going to want to watch this. I was with my girl and all that. And the guy's like, yeah, whatever, like that. And he's an older guy. He's in his 50s. And so he's like, what the hell? Let me check this out. And what does he do? There's an emergency call, and you don't know what happens. You see Walken and Wood run into the house where the guy lives. because he put it on, and it's basically like VR, where he's having the sensations of an orgasm, but he's had it for going on about 6 to 8 hours, nonstop, watching this over and over, and he nearly dies from the intensity of the emotional experience. And we see a few samples of that in here, kind of with the negative, especially with the military and the fighter planes. But that's exactly what humans would do. They'd want to party with it. They'd want to screw around with it. They'd want to do stupid ass stuff with it too. And of course, the military is quietly going about their business, starting to interject people in there. They're recording everything that's going on too without their knowledge of it. So you got that whole element going on. So by the time you get to the third act, you're like, holy shit, what's really going on here? Because it's very clear that Natalie and Christopher Walken, no matter what happened off stage, if they were having an affair with Robert Wagner or they were swingers or whatever was going on, that they've got great chemistry, at the very least on screen. But you see a couple going through trauma because they're getting divorced, reconcile, and was it the right thing to do? Because the most interesting thing I think about this film, and I want you guys to comment on if you thought it was cheesy or not, is Walken actually gets so kind of pissed off at everything. He thinks about his failing relationship and with the one that he's seeing that just had a heart attack and died. He thinks back about being married and all that stuff. And so in his brain, he relives all the positive things that went on with him and Natalie Wood, records it, and sends it to her as a gift. And that alone, she feels his love and all that, and they kind of reconcile for the big third act where stuff happens or whatever. That's how you do a story. It's you have characters, you have a little plot device here that in terms of science fiction, that what would we humans do with it, and you see that kind of getting explored out. So did you think that guys did you think that was a good thing to do or not, or were you expecting that, or what? How did you feel?
I just want you to imagine what it would be like to experience immense pleasure repeatedly over and over till your pants are so creamed, corn is jealous.
I'll never eat cream corn again.
Jokes aside, no, I thought that was truly a. I think that you could consider that cheesy, I guess. Maybe some would. I don't. I think that from the perspective of him, I mean, it absolutely makes sense that he'd want to take a dive in, and reliving all of that, he feels everything that was almost lost to him. And I think a lot of people could benefit from something like that, remembering the good that they've had and not just dropping it all with these. I think that with their situation, it absolutely ties into the movie together. It's not some cheesy rom-com way of dealing with it. And I liked it. I did. I think it was a nice touch.
I just wonder if, even though it seems presented in the movie as it being a sincere attempt at reconciliation between the two, if there's that part of you as a character, which isn't going to matter in terms of this film, that you'd go, man, it's over, but if I can make her feel the way I was feeling, I can get her back, because it's like a gimmick rather than the real thing. You know what I'm saying? Because Natalie Wood putting it on and reliving it is making her feel that, right? I mean, that's the whole point to this device. So it's not like she, all of a sudden is generating these reminders of her emotions on her own. It's manufactured. That was the creepy part to it to me.
No, I don't even, like, yes, she's feeling what he felt in that moment, but it's not like she was hypnotized. I think a lot of the machine makes you well aware of what you're experiencing, like, for some of them at least, isn't their own, and they know that. Like, it affects their body, it affects that, but they are themselves going through what somebody else went through. So yes, they feel those emotions, but I think if she truly hated him, like, even with the love in that moment, it's not like she's like, oh, it's all fancy free and stuff. They were kind of embittered towards each other, but it was a natural separation. It wasn't something that it wasn't that he was. I don't see it as a pure manipulation. I think that's not the goal. It's a reminder more than anything. And when you think on memories as a human and you had good times with someone you loved, yes, a lot of those they turn into bitter moments. Like, I don't feel that way anymore. And yes, feeling that his emotion is an element, but I don't think that overrides everything. So
Wow, lots of words from the young one there. What about you, RDV?
I really enjoyed this movie. I mean, it wasn't. I would say like an over. I mean, it was not overly serious. You know, there was a few jokes in there. You point out the two with the guy takes the helmet. No, go where the helmet where he's gonna have sex with his girlfriend. That was kind of funny. But
creamed corn.
the helmet itself though was kind of really trippy too. It's like a motorcycle helmet. They put all these gizmos on.
Right.
It's like you don't really see that kind of like technology or whatever like in movies anymore when they're gonna do like scientific reach.
Right.
No.
You're right. That's a good point too, because everything now is micronized. So
the closest we got to that was
think-
Ghostbusters with Rick Moranis wearing that little cap with the wires attached to it.
I think that's also a point that what you were just saying right there, Rob. I think that's also featured in the film, because think about how the device used to experience all of these things, it kept getting redesigned. Once they had the technology how they wanted it, they were able to essentially get it like a streamlined fashion. So it absolutely makes sense. I mean, look at VR technology now. Same thing. Used to be that you had to have this a giant helmet, but it's gone down to these little goggles that people can now use to, not in the same fashion, but go ahead and see something else. A new world, as it were.
Yeah, no, this has what I would call an '80s ending, and RDV, we've talked a lot about '80s films. It's so what happens here after they have the reconciliation with some actual shots, of Wrightsville Beach there with the Wright brothers and everything too, because they are scientists, or at least he is. They reconcile, and of course the thing that makes him want to take control over the last little act of his life here, as it were, because things are getting out of control. So the government's basically taking over quietly the whole project, but his son, even though he took a copy of it home accidentally, or really it just kind of happens that his son basically watches the death footage, if you will, and it causes an almost near-death reaction in him. So that solidifies them to go forward on how can they deal with this. What were you going to say?
Not the death footage. It was not the death footage. It was the military tapes that they had gone ahead and started developing.
For brainwashing, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I stand corrected. You're right, because we do get to see the super top secret when they hack into it, because hacking was an elaborate affair back then. At least movies attempted to show you this, like war games, right?
Yep.
They didn't talk down to you as an audience. They explained what you would have to do with it, because you're right. There's that scene, and I'll mention this too. When you're watching it, you can tell, and I think this is a smart way of doing it. They change the perspective, like a la Michael Myers third person, where you're looking through the person's eyes, and in here, when they do that, they have this curved area around the corners, almost like you're looking through a lens at something while people are talking. And so you see that where they're going into the government agency, where the one guy's talking, hey, we've got extreme stuff coming behind us. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it goes on. But the point is okay, now there's a challenge to the family unit. Now that the adults are back together and reconciled, they're stronger than ever. What do? When their technology is taken away and the project manager's boss is on semi-retirement due to his orgasmic stuff, he goes and he sees the orgasmic guy, and the guy's like, man, it's really good to see you. I had a life epiphany, and basically he had a middle-aged life crisis, and now he's just playing golf and enjoying what time he's got left, and it makes sense. But basically he's like, I got to get a copy of the computer. So what do we see Walken and Natalie do? They go have a nice little romantic dinner somewhere, and they do like what most couples do when they reconcile. they get into a big old fight, and then they separate and they go their own ways, and you're like, what the hell's going on? And then you realize it's a big elaborate stage because they're being followed, and they both together, and we don't really see it until they execute it here at the end in the last act. They work on breaking into the factory where all the stuff is out, overtaking everything and basically destroying it, which is kind of maybe the way it's done. It looks a little dated or something, but you get what they're trying to do, and it works out well. And you're like, oh, okay, the happy couple back together, working together as a unit and doing something to, end the movie. I mean, that's a very 80s way to handle it, wouldn't you say, RDV?
It was. Sorry, I was tweeting out the stream. I said the whole movie is it's very early 80s. I mean, going through looking at just the way they're capturing not just the lab but outside the lab when they went to the pool party thing,
right?
So that thing going. I was okay. I'm like okay, what's going on here? Because I thought it'd be focusing more in the lab, but they're focusing outside the lab too. Having the whole brainwashing thing was a very 80s kind of early 80s trope thing too. That kind of reminded me of Knight Rider, like an episode like that. There's always something like that where Michael had to go in. He had to deal with technology. Even Kolchak had that thing. They where the government gets involved with that android. So this isn't the first time we've seen stuff like this, But overall, though, you could tell it's early 80s though. Just the way the acting, the script, there wasn't really a big over. I don't know if this was a hype. This is probably a low budget film. Even that, there was no like big 80s hits, in it. No noticeable sound on the soundtrack.
Yeah, and the other thing too is the movie itself. It's pretty beautiful where they're at in the Research Park area, which is Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Durham, Duke area in North Carolina. So you get these beautiful pines. They have a very modernistic house because in the 70s and 80s, this whole bit of echoism, I guess if you want to call it that, started showing up where you had a lot of natural things being in some of the more important meeting places at the time for a long time in shopping malls. You had a lot of natural fountains. You had a lot of natural light. You had a lot of plants and stuff like that. You don't see that now in shopping centers or malls anymore. That it's all cold and everything. But the building they were in looked very, very funky, and I felt like I was walking around in it because of how a lot of buildings and malls were designed back then in the 60s and 70s, and they lasted through the 80s and 90s, especially here in Central Florida. That you had that like a red carpet, you had that kind of open area that looked kind of like a prison, but not quite. And so the building almost looks futuristic. And in today's world, that would be a CGI backdrop rather than a real building. So, your eyes wouldn't be drawn into it because it's not real. I mean, it's the problem with CGI and the depth and everything. No matter how good they make it look, it's you can kind of tell. But overall, I agree with you. It's a deliberate movie. It's slow. I think it's surprisingly very good. It's not one that you can rewatch though tons of times, but if you want an idea of what I think a good science fiction film is, because it deals with human themes because of technology and how it affects humans, it's this. And RDV, you and I had covered Soylent Green and some other stuff, not a lot of them, but that came out of population control, a certain type of idea about the earth can only support so many people based off of resources and all that too, which of course has always been proven to be false, but that's invaded a lot of political talk, as it were, in different areas of the world. And so you have different views on it. So good or bad, it made for a damn good film with, Soylent Green as people and those things. But this movie does a good job of it too. And then Pixel, you mentioned the VR part to it. I mean, it's so obvious, but it's super popular now, isn't it?
Yep. The only way that this movie could be improved is if there was more cowbell.
All right. On that note, any other final thoughts, Pixel, before we go to RDV?
No. It's a solid film. You can definitely sit down and enjoy it. You get a peek at the mastery that is Christopher Walken that is to come. But there's definitely a lot to enjoy in the film. So go ahead, check it out if you haven't, and if you have, why not watch it again? It's been a few years, hasn't it? But that's all.
RDV, bring it home for us.
I'll just say this is a excellent movie. What Pixel said as far as it's science fiction. It's it's early '80s. It's Christopher Walken. You get Natalie Wood in here too. You know, uh, just the fact that we have a Karen in this movie, and she is a good Karen.
The Karen we needed all along.
Yes. What happened to this Karen?
She died. No.
The '80s hit feminism. No,
It was a different kind. It was well, the thing about her, I'll say this, she was really the brains of the group, because basically Walken's a bit naive, even though he's smart.
yeah,
He's the one that understands the different sides to it. And it's one thing about being a good scientist. It's another one where they're sitting in a meeting with their project manager, and she says to him, look, you really have no idea what the hell is going on here, dude. And he's like, no, we're doing technology or whatever. And it's like, no, you're an idiot. You have no idea that whatever you do and work for somebody else is going to be their pets. It's going to be under their control. And that's the thing that, he, as a genius scientist, doesn't seem to be able to understand. And so not only does he understand that through a woman who ends up having to pay the ultimate price and dying and having a heart attack working and being stressed out, having to carry his ass, he also basically kind of gets humbled by, Natalie Wood and everything too, realizing that, hey, I'm more than just a genius scientist. I'm a husband and a father, and that kind of comes first. So you could argue RDV, and you've mentioned this before, that there's very few wholesome aspects to films, and you could argue that we find all three people kind of, stepping up a level, in terms of the humanity and reaching a higher plane. And unfortunately, one of them passes away, but the other two are together, and it's a natural progression that seems to fit and work. And that's why when we talk about dealing with characters and all that, it's nice to see that it matters. So yeah, good film, definitely worth watching, definitely real science fiction, which is very rare for us to do. So when we find a good one, we like to cover it here on the Xtreme Movie Show. Obviously, for RDB from the Great Midwest, Professor Pixel here from Central Florida, I'd like to say thank you for listening, everybody. Have a good night. And as always, stay extreme.
Good night.